If you're considering making a move to Brunswick, Georgia, here are 10 things that you need to consider before packing your bags and heading down south. Hi, I'm Cassie Long with Horizon Realty, and I help individuals and families just like you relocate right here to South Coastal Georgia every single day. Seriously, I get calls, texts, emails, phone calls. Did I say calls? Call me. All of my information is down in the description box below. I would love to help you and your family relocate right here to South Coastal Georgia. Nestled along the southeastern coast of the state of Georgia is Brunswick, Georgia. Now, you will really love this coastal lifestyle, but there are some things to consider that if you are moving from another area, you might not even think about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. 10 things to consider before packing your bags and moving to Brunswick, Georgia. Speaking of the coastal lifestyle, if you like living that coastal lifestyle, outdoor recreational activities, water, boating activities, kayaking, anything like that, fishing, then you are sure to love this area. There is no short supply of outdoor water activities. But there is one thing to consider that comes with the coastal lifestyle, and that is flooding and the risk of hurricanes. So hurricane season down here typically runs from the beginning of June to the end of November. Now, every season is a little different. We've had seasons where we get nothing. And then we've had seasons where we've had a major tropical storm come through and actually do some damage. We've had, since I've been here for 6 years, we have had some mandatory evacuations and we have had some voluntary evacuations. And depending on where you live in Brunswick, Brunswick is the mainland to St. Simons Island. So obviously St. Simons Island is going to get it more than Brunswick, but just off the causeway, the mainland in Brunswick, you still have waterways that run all around Brunswick and through Brunswick. So there are tons of areas in Brunswick that are more prone to flooding. The downtown area of Brunswick specifically is a little bit more prone to flooding. So that is something to consider when making your move. You are likely to have flood insurance. Again, that's not everywhere in Brunswick. There are tons of areas in Brunswick where you don't have to hold flood insurance, but just something to consider and do a little further research on. Homelessness in Brunswick. So this is not something that you will find just by browsing homes on Zillow. You will not see that, yes, we do have an increasing homeless population here in Brunswick, and I'm just pointing to statistics and facts. But I will say that the authorities here are doing a good job of trying to mediate that situation. Recently, there's been a development of a tiny home village. They're really cute little homes to try and help get people off of the streets. I believe that those homes are for veterans specifically. So if you are moving here and you are someone who likes to get involved in the community, then there are tons of ways to get involved at local shelters, through donations and things like that. But that is something to consider that you will not likely find when you're browsing homes on Zillow. So do your research on the homeless population here in Brunswick. Number 3, what is that smell? The first time I came to Brunswick, we came right over the Sydney Linear Bridge, which comes from Jekyll right into Brunswick, and it hit me, like just hit me right in the face. Rotten eggs. I'm from the Atlanta area. Did not have that smell where I grew up. So if you are not familiar, Brunswick does have a couple of mills. Pinova is one of the larger ones, a paper mill, which recently has closed or is closing. I'm not sure the timeline, but there is another mill that contributes to that smell. Now, the smell is not constant, and it is something that you get used to. And I know you might be saying, well, I don't want to get used to the smell of rotten eggs, but you do get used to it, and it does come in waves. It's funny because we're now in Camden County, and anytime we come over into Brunswick, my daughter, who is almost 6, immediately is like, oh, what's that smell? And then she'll just look at me and she'll say Brunswick. You just kind of get used to it, and it just becomes part of life. It's really not that bad. It's not constant, but in specific areas, it is a little bit worse than others. Brunswick is home to Georgia Pacific's cellulose plant. And so that is where a lot of that rotten smell comes from. You can read more about that smell and the paper, the pulp, and all of that, and kind of, where that comes from, linked down in the description box below if you care to learn more. Otherwise, just know that there's a little bit of a smell. All right, moving on, Southern coastal food. So Southern food mixed with seafood, you've got a beautiful marriage for a food scene here. Our food scene in Brunswick is exploding. In the downtown area specifically, you can find a number of amazing restaurants. When we first moved here, I know I keep saying that, when we first moved here, but Brunswick has changed so much in the last 6 years, and it has grown exponentially, and it's just continuing to grow. So when we first moved here, when we wanted to go out to eat, you know, we don't eat out that often, but when we wanted to go out to eat, we would just go over to St. Simon's Island. That was where all the good food was. Now, we still go over to St. Simon's Island, but now primarily we'll go to downtown Brunswick because it has exploded with amazing food. You've got Reed's Apothecary, one of our favorite date night spots, locally sourced ingredients, amazing. You've got Schroeder's Market, one of our newest favorite date night spots, and just family date spots. They've actually got like a chef's counter that you can sit at, and it's got a little market where you can shop smaller goods and things like that. And it's all locally sourced ingredients as well. So super fresh, delicious. They're just a fun gang too, a lot of fun people there. And there are just tons of restaurants in downtown Brunswick now that are really good. Indigo Coastal Shanty is another one of our favorites. So you've got that bustling food scene, and then you've also got your chain restaurants. Of course, you've got Chipotle, we keep them in business for sure. You've got Panera, you've got a Chili's, you know, so you've got that mix of chain and then really delicious, fresh, local, small business. Okay, we're back to talk about the next one. I was trying to get this video filmed before this monster woke up, but he's just gonna join us. So, you know, cause realtors are moms too, we're real people. So he's gonna hang out. The next thing we're gonna talk about is the climate. So yes, it gets really hot here, it gets really humid. We have bugs that if you're coming from the West Coast, you've probably never seen them before. We have mosquitoes, gnats, all of that. Being on the coast just brings that. We are, you know, in Georgia, there's something called the gnat line. So if you're north of Macon, you're above the gnat line, you're good. So all of Atlanta, you're good. Below the gnat line, South Georgia, you're gonna have gnats, and our gnats bite. So just something to consider if you're moving. Like when we moved from Atlanta, I brought all my chunky sweaters, super cute. You can go ahead and downsize now. You will not need those sweaters. And additionally, because of the warm climate, if you are an avid gardener, then you'll love living here. You seriously, like, our growing season is so long, and we're in zone 9A for the most part. And yeah, you have a really long growing season and generally good soil. All right, the next thing that you need to consider is the school system. Now, does Brunswick, Georgia have good schools? So as a realtor, I cannot steer in anywhere based on schools, but I can point you to the facts. So head over to niche.com. If you click the link below to my blog post, I've got it linked there under the school section, but I can break it down and tell you there are 8 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, and only 2 high schools. So you're looking at Brunswick High School or Glenn Academy, and those serve not just Brunswick, but Glenn County as a whole, which is basically Brunswick, St. Simon's Island, and Jekyll Island. And Glenn County also has top-rated numerous private schools and even homeschool co-op options. So there are options here as far as schools, but overall the schools are pretty good. In addition to lower level schools like elementary through high school, we also are home to the College of Coastal Georgia, which is a 4-year program, and the nursing program there is growing a lot, and we do have some sports associated with the college, not a football or baseball team, but there are some sports associated with that college. Moving on, the cost of living. So in comparison to surrounding areas like St. Simon's Island, Jekyll Island, or even up north to Savannah or down south to Jacksonville, Brunswick's cost of living is lower. Actually, statistically speaking, it's 12% lower than the national average. But let's be honest, if you're watching this video when it goes live, it's 2023 and everything's expensive, everything's inflated. So to say the cost of living is lower than the national average, I don't know how much that means to you, but it is a little bit more affordable if you're looking to go coastal. And if you want to know kind of like the average breakdown of homes, again, you can click the link below for that blog post where I break that down a little bit further. The next thing to consider is the tourism industry. So obviously Brunswick doesn't see a large influx of, you know, tourists during those peak seasons as you do on the island. But like I said, with the downtown area growing, we do see kind of that overflow in Brunswick. And so that contributes a lot to the success of these small businesses, and it's just continuing to gain traction. And then also Brunswick is home to FLETC, which is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and we get new students all of the time. So sometimes they have like a 6-month assignment and sometimes it's like 3 to 5 years. But that constant influx and changeover contributes to the growth here in Brunswick. And if you're looking to invest in short-term here in Brunswick, short-term rentals, or even long-term rentals, then you do have a good market for that due to FLETC and, of course, like I mentioned, the College of Coastal Georgia and the hospital. You know, it's not 2020 anymore, so we don't get as many travel nurses, but we do still, I do know a few people that rent out rooms or have homes that they rent out to nurses and, you know, people that come here for the hospital and things like that. Alrighty, another thing to consider is the crime rate in Brunswick specifically. So if you look at the map, if you put in Brunswick in Google Maps, it's just gonna highlight a small part of Brunswick. But what it doesn't highlight when you put in Brunswick, Georgia, are the surrounding areas that are still considered Brunswick. But on the map, they'll say Sterling, Dock Junction, Country Club Estates. But if you live in those areas, your address is Brunswick, Georgia. It's not Country Club Estates, Georgia. So just take that into consideration when you look at certain statistics online, that it might not be encompassing all of Brunswick. So I cannot steer, I can only point you to the statistics. Linked below, you can find a color-coded map for the crime rates in Brunswick, Georgia. It's definitely something that you want to look at and be aware of to make sure that you move to the right area for you and your family in Brunswick. And of course, once you become my client by calling me, we can talk about that in more detail to make sure that you do pick the right area for you and your family, because each area of Brunswick is a little bit different and can offer a different, you know, vibe and lifestyle, if you will. And the last thing to consider is childcare. If you are relocating here, I urge you to start looking at childcare options like yesterday. The childcare facilities here do fill up rather quickly and oftentimes are on a wait list. So that is something to consider if you're making a move here. You want to get on those wait lists as soon as possible, especially if you have a child under the age of 4. Our school system does operate on a lottery for pre-K. So all of our public schools do offer pre-K, but it is a lottery, meaning that you register and they pretty much draw numbers out of a hat, and if you get in, you get in. If you don't, well, then you got to pay for childcare and wait till kindergarten. Again, there are also private school options where you could potentially get in, you know, pay to have your child go at that age for pre-K. So childcare is definitely something to consider. If you are making your move, you want to go ahead and get them on a list as soon as possible. Now, I've given you 10 things to consider when making your move to Brunswick, Georgia, but if you still feel like you need to know more, then watch this video right here where I take you on a full map tour of Brunswick, Georgia. Don't forget, all of my information is linked down in the description box below, and if you are making a move to South Coastal Georgia, I would love to represent you as your realtor and help you make that move.